Hi, in this video we'll be talking about multiple and single iterators. If you don't feel comfortable about iterables and iterators, I have a video dedicated just to that topic, so don't hesitate to watch it first, so that you can follow what we're talking about in this video. In the other video we discussed the differences between the two concepts, and we also discussed some examples of iterables like lists, tuples, strings, dictionaries, ranges, files, enumerates, maps, zips, and filters. So we know what iterables are and how they return iterators or are iterators themselves. But is it possible for an iterable to return more than one iterator? Well, it depends. Some iterables support multiple iterators, others don't. Let's start with a list. A list is an iterable, so let's try to obtain two iterators from it and test whether they can work independently. Here's our list, nums. And now let's try to obtain two separate iterators. It1 equals iter nums. It2 equals iter nums. And now let's check if they can be used independently. For example, next it1. And we get the first element in the nums list, 1. Let's use this iterator one more time. Next it1. We get 2, which is the second element. And now let's use it2, the second iterator. So next it2. As we can see, we get the first element again. Let's use the second iterator again, and we get the second element in the list. And one more time, we get the third element in the list. And now let's get back to our first iterator. So next, it1. And we get the third element. As we can see here, we left off at the second element. And now we resumed at the third element. Let's use the first iterator one more time. And now we're at element 4. So as you can see, these two iterations are independent. The elements are returned independently by each iterator. So lists do support multiple iterators. In the video about iterables and iterators, we classified all the iterables as belonging to one of the following categories. Iterables which are not iterators, but they return an iterator, and iterables which are iterators themselves. A list belongs to the first category, so it is not an iterator, but it returns an iterator. It turns out that all iterables in this category support multiple iterators, and these include lists, tuples, strings, dictionaries, and ranges. And here are some examples. First, a tuple. Here we have our animals tuple and two iterators. Let's see whether they can work independently. So, next, iterator 1, dog. Next, iterator 1, mouse. Next, it1, wolf. Next it1, bear. Next it1, stop iteration error, because we have run out of elements. Bear is the last element, but we still have the second iterator. So let's use it now. Next, it2, dog. Next it2, mouse. Next, wolf. Next, bear. And the stop iteration error. So as you can see, it works for tuples as well. How about strings? Here we have a string, word, Python, and this time we have 3 iterators, at 1, 2, and 3. and we can use them simultaneously like so. Next, iterate1, next, iterate2, next, iterate3. And what we get is p. This iterator returns the first element from this string. This iterator also returns the first element in this string, and so does this iterator. They all work independently, and each of them remembers where it has left off to resume work at the same position the next time it's called. And now let's use the first iterator 3 times. So next, iterate1, next, iterate1, next, iterate1. And what we get are the following 3 characters: I, T, H. So iterator 1 has now left off at H, but iterator 2 and 3 have left off at P. So if we now call the iterator 2 next iterate2, it will return the second element, Y. And now let's again call the first iterator 2 times. So next, iterate1, next, iterate1. ON. So this time we got the last 2 characters. And now we're done with iterator 1. Let's have a look at iterator 3. Next, iterate3. Now iterator 3 was last used here, where it returned P, the first element. So it left off at the first element, and now it should return the second element, which is Y. And so it does. Well, we know that the first iterator has used up all the elements, so what happens if we try to call it again? Next, iterate1. Naturally, we get the stop iteration error. And finally, let's call the second and third iterators one more time. Next, iterate2, next, iterate3. And we get T and T. And here we can clearly see that all the iterators work independently. Now let's have a look at a dictionary. Here we have a dictionary, course, and 2 iterators. Let's try to see whether these 2 iterators can work independently too. So next, iterate1, Mike, the first key. Okay. Next, iterate1 again, Luke, the second element. Okay, it works. And now let's use the second iterator to see whether it returns the first element as it should. And so it does. And it works the same with ranges. Here we have a range which generates numbers between 4 and 24. 25 is not included. And the step is set to 4, which means every 4th number is generated. And here we have 2 iterators. And let's see whether these 2 iterators can work independently. So next, iterate1, 4, which is the first number generated by the range function. Next, iterate1, 8. As we can see, the step is 4, so 4 plus 4 is 8, so it's correct. And next, 12, next, 16, and so on. How about the second iterator? Next, iterate2. It should return the first element, the first number. And so it does, 4. Then it returns the second element, and so on. On the other hand, iterables, which are iterators at the same time, only support single iterators. If we try to define more iterators, they will all reference the same object. This is because the object is the iterator itself. a zip is an example. As it is an iterator, we don't have to use the iter function, but we can. Have a look. Here we have a zip and two iterators. Well, a zip zips element from one sequence with elements from another sequence. And let's now try to use these two iterators. Next, it1, it returns A1. So A is zipped with 1. Okay, let's use the first iterator again. And now we get the second element, B2. Okay, and now let's try to use the second iterator. So next, it2. If it worked independently, it should return A1 again, but it returns C3. So as you can see, both iterators are at the same position, so they do not work independently. As we don't need the iter function, we could rewrite the code as follows. Here are the two iterators, and actually Z is the iterator itself. And now we can use the next function like so. Next, iterator 1, A1, the first element. Next, iterator 2, and we get the next element. So these two iterators are at the same position. They do not work independently. Well, as the zip object is an iterator itself, it can be used in the next function too. So, next z, and here we get the third element. Apart from zips, this category includes files, enumerates, maps, and filters. Let's have a look at files first. Well, let's create a file in our current directory. New text document. Let's call it workers.txt. Let's open it for edition and let's paste the following 4 lines of text into it. Let's save it, close. Let's go back to our IDE. Now we can use the file. So first let's open the file. F equals open workers.txt, and we are opening it for reading. And now let's define two iterators. It1 equals iter f. It2 equals iter f. Well, actually, files are iterators themselves, so we can use them as iterators. So, for example, it3 equals file. And now let's use the iterators to see whether they are independent or not. Next, it1. And we get John Smith, 36, programmer. This is the first line in our text document. Now let's use the second iterator. Next, it2. As you can see, we're now getting the second line of text, which means these two iterators are not independent. They are the same position. Let's use our third iterator. Next, it3. And this is line number 3. As files are iterators themselves, we can use them in our next function too. So next f, and here we get the last line of text. So this is the last line of text from our file, and if we try to use any of the iterators one more time, like for example so, we'll get a stop iteration error. Now let's have a look at enumerates. Here we have an enumerate, letters equals, enumerate A, B, C, D, E. Enumerates return the elements from a sequence along with their indices. And we have 3 iterators defined here. Let's see how they work. Next, 81 returns 0A, index 0, element A. Let's use it again. 1B, index 1, element B. Now let's use the iterator number 2. Next, 82, and we get index 2, element C, so the next element. How about next, 83? We get the next element. And as enumerates are iterators themselves, they can also be used in the next function. Next letters. And we get the next element. Next, let's have a look at maps. Here we have a map. A map applies a function to each element in a sequence. Here we have a tuple, and to each element of this tuple, this lambda function is applied. So each number is divided by 10. And we have 2 iterators. Let's have a look how they work. Next, 81. And we get the first element, 3 divided by 10. How about next, 82? We get the second element. How about next, M? We can use a map like so because the map is an iterator itself. And we get this element, the next element, 10 divided by 10. And for example, next, 82. And now we get the last element. If we try to call the function again, we'll get the stop iteration error. And finally, let's have a look at filters. Here we have a filter. So a filter filters out all the elements in a sequence for which this function returns false, and only the elements are maintained for which this function returns true. So let's have a look at this sequence. It's a string. I bought 54 pieces 3 days ago. And the function which is supposed to be applied here is string is digit. This function returns true if a character is a digit. So in our case, we have 3 such characters, 5, 4, 3. And the iterable, which is going to be produced here, will contain just the 3 characters, 5, 4, and 3. Here we have the 2 iterators, and let's try to use the first one. Next, 81, 5. Okay, naturally it's a string, not an integer. And now let's use the second iterator, 82, and we get the second element, 4. If we run the function again, we'll get the last element, 3. And one more time, we'll get the stop iteration error. So as you can see, some iterables do support multiple iterators, others don't. Okay, that's it for this video. If you like it, a thumbs up would be great. Also, make sure to subscribe for future videos. If you want to leave a comment or ask a question, you're welcome to do so. Thanks for watching.